It was 7 a.m., August 17th, 1943, when the humid morning haze rolled across the WWII airstrip in Papua New Guinea. The war in the Pacific had entered its fiercest phase. American pilots were pushing deep into Japanese-held skies, and the twin-boomed Lockheed P-38 Lightning, sleek, fast, and heavily armed, was the spearhead of that air offensive. But on that morning, Captain Tom "Red" McGuire, one of the 475th Fighter Group's finest pilots, returned from a sortie cursing into his oxygen mask. His Lightning had nearly killed him. Again. "Damn near lost her in the dive!" McGuire shouted as his P-38 rolled to a stop. "Controls locked up tight as a bank vault. Couldn't pull out till 10,000. His crew chief, Sergeant Joe Barton, looked up from the maintenance cart, his oil-stained hands gripping a wrench. Barton wasn't an engineer or a college-trained mechanic. He was a farm boy from Kansas who learned about engines by tearing apart tractors and fixing them with whatever he could find. But that morning, he knew something was deeply wrong. The problem wasn't new. Pilots across the Pacific had been reporting it for months. At high speeds, the P-38's elevator controls froze solid. When diving to escape zeros, the Lightning became unresponsive, trapped in a deadly nose-down plunge that killed several pilots. Lockheed engineers back in California were scrambling for solutions, but the frontline crews didn't have that luxury. They had to fly tomorrow.
The Pacific's deadly equation. The Japanese Zero was lighter, more agile, and could turn on a dime. The P-38 was faster and packed twin engines, turbo superchargers, and a battery of 4 .50 caliber machine guns plus a 20mm cannon. On paper, it was a killer, but in practice, the Lightning's speed came with a curse: compressibility. As the plane dove past 400 miles per hour, air pressure over its thick wings and control surfaces caused the tail to stiffen. The pilot would pull the stick, but the plane wouldn't respond. Some Lightnings slammed into the jungle or the ocean before regaining control. Pilots began whispering that the P-38 was a beautiful death trap. That day, McGuire's close call was the final straw. He and Barton stood over the wing, sweating under the tropical sun, arguing about physics neither of them fully understood. Then Barton did something unusual. He grabbed a coil of steel safety wire, a tool used to lock bolts in place, and stared at the Lightning's tail assembly. "If the damn tail's twisting," Barton muttered, "then maybe we just need to stop it from twisting." It was a crazy idea, but crazy ideas were how wars were won.
The wire trick. That night, while the airfield slept, Barton stayed by the plane. He ran a tensioned steel wire from the elevator's torque tubes through the tail booms, creating a crossbrace that effectively stiffened the tail under high-speed loads. He wasn't trying to redesign Lockheed's masterpiece, just to stop it from killing his pilot. When McGuire saw it the next morning, he laughed. "You trying to hang Christmas lights on her, Joe?" "Nah," Barton replied, tightening the last wire. "Just trying to keep your tail where it belongs." On their next mission, they met the enemy. A squadron of A-6M-Zeros pounced near Wewak. The fight erupted in seconds. McGuire dove his P-38 into a steep chase, hitting 420 miles per hour. The air screamed around the canopy, but this time the controls held. The Lightning obeyed. He leveled off low over the sea, rolled up behind a Zero, and fired. The Japanese fighter burst into flames. By the end of that week, McGuire had downed 4 Zeros. Every pilot wanted to know what Barton had done. Word spread quickly across the 5th Air Force. Some Kansas mechanic found a way to make the Lightning dance. Engineering redemption. Back in California, Lockheed engineers received the field report. They tested Barton's idea and confirmed it. His stupid wire trick worked. It provided temporary rigidity to the elevator's linkage, reducing tail flex and restoring control authority at high speeds. Engineers later refined the fix with dive recovery flaps, but Barton's improvisation saved lives months before the official solution arrived. From that point, the P-38 transformed from a cautious experiment into one of the Pacific's deadliest interceptors. It became the mount of America's top aces, Richard Bong and Thomas McGuire, both Medal of Honor recipients, each flying P-38s fine-tuned by mechanics inspired by Barton's innovation.
Legacy. By war's end, the P-38 Lightning had destroyed over 1,800 Japanese aircraft, escorted bombers deep into enemy territory, and outraced nearly everything in the Pacific. And in hangars and tents across the islands, mechanics still used Barton's simple wire bracing, a reminder that sometimes the smallest fixes, born from desperation, change the course of history. The P-38 wasn't just a plane. It was proof that war is won not only by generals and engineers, but by the sweat, courage, and wild ingenuity of men on the ground.
The Lightning strikes back. By the autumn of 1943, the Pacific skies belonged to no one. Japan still held vast chains of islands fortified with airstrips and radar posts. Their Mitsubishi Zeros, once untouchable, were now meeting a new kind of enemy, the American P-38 Lightning, faster, higher flying, and more heavily armed. What Japan didn't know was that the Lightning had been reborn. The wire trick Sergeant Joe Barton first improvised in the field had been quietly adopted by ground crews across the South Pacific. Word spread through mechanics' grapevines and pilot briefings, and before Lockheed could issue a formal bulletin, hundreds of Lightnings were flying with hand-tuned reinforcements, giving them control at speeds no Zero could match. Now, the hunters had become the hunted.
A sky full of death. On November 8, 1943, near Rabaul, 20 P-38s of the 475th Fighter Group climbed through a wall of monsoon clouds. Below, the jungle-covered slopes of New Britain burned from days of bombardment. Above, radar detected incoming Japanese formations, bombers and escort Zeros headed toward Allied convoys. Captain Thomas "Tommy" McGuire led the formation, with his wingman, Captain Dick Bong, another rising ace. Both men trusted their Lightnings now like extensions of their own bodies. At 25,000 feet, McGuire spotted the first enemy flight, silver glints against the blue horizon. "Bandits, 10 o'clock high," crackled over the radio. The throttles slammed forward, superchargers screamed. Within seconds, the P-38s streaked toward the enemy at over 400 miles per hour. The Zeros tried to roll and dive, their favorite escape, but this time the Lightning could follow. McGuire's aircraft plunged behind one Zero, leveled, and unleashed its nose guns, 450 calibers and one 20mm cannon firing straight down the fuselage line. The Japanese plane exploded mid-air, leaving only a spinning fireball. "They can't dive away anymore," McGuire shouted. "We've got 'em."
The turning point in the Pacific. The success of the wire fix reached Lockheed's engineers by early 1944. They confirmed Barton's field solution and upgraded it with dive recovery flaps, which automatically deployed during high-speed dives to restore lift and prevent control lock. This modification would make the Lightning one of the safest, fastest, and most effective fighters in the Allied arsenal. By now, General George C. Kenney, commander of the 5th Air Force, called the P-38 the best damn fighter we've got. The Lightning could escort bombers deep into Japanese territory, far beyond the range of any single-engine fighter. In the months that followed, the P-38 became a terror to Japanese pilots and shipping convoys. Its long range and heavy armament allowed it to perform fighter sweeps, photo reconnaissance, bomber escort, and ground attack missions across the Pacific. And all of it
Every mission, every victory, was built upon the foundation of a single mechanic's improvisation on a remote airstrip.
The Ace Factory. By mid-1944, the P-38 Lightning had earned a new nickname among its pilots, the Ace Factory. In squadrons like the 475th and the 8th Fighter Group, new pilots arrived nervous and green, and within months, they were shooting down planes faster than any other Allied fighter unit. The secret was in the design. The P-38's twin engines gave it unmatched reliability. Even if one was shot out, a skilled pilot could fly hundreds of miles home. Its turbo superchargers allowed it to climb above 30,000 feet, where the Zeros struggled for oxygen. And its concentrated nose armament meant all 5 guns fired straight ahead. No need to converge at a distance. One burst, one kill. Captain Richard Bong, a soft-spoken Wisconsin farm boy, became the top-scoring American ace of the war, with 40 confirmed kills, every one of them in a P-38. McGuire wasn't far behind, with 38. But for all their glory, Bong and McGuire never forgot the men on the ground. "We fly 'em," McGuire once said, "but they keep us alive." He was talking about mechanics like Joe Barton. The man's stupid wire trick had turned a death trap into the most feared fighter in the Pacific.
Lockheed's response and perfection. In Burbank, California, Lockheed engineers worked around the clock, refining Barton's idea into the P-38J and P-38L models. These versions featured factory-installed dive flaps, improved intercoolers, and boosted engine power, capable of speeds over 440 miles per hour. When the new Lightnings arrived in the Pacific, Japanese pilots were stunned. Their once invincible Zeros couldn't climb or dive with the Americans anymore. A Japanese combat report recovered after the war noting, "The twin-tailed American fighter is faster than anything we have. It no longer loses control in a dive. We cannot escape it." The balance of air power had shifted.
Legacy of the Lightning.
By the time Japan surrendered in 1945, the P-38 Lightning had served on every front, from the Aleutian Islands to the Philippines. It destroyed more enemy aircraft than any other twin-engine fighter in history and became a symbol of American engineering, improvisation, and teamwork. The final production run totaled over 10,000 aircraft, each one embodying lessons written in the blood and sweat of frontline crews. And somewhere among them, perhaps on a rusting airframe in a jungle graveyard, lay a strand of steel wire, the simple invention that changed the course of aerial combat. Epilogue: The Mechanic's Legacy. After the war, Sergeant Joe Barton returned to Kansas. He never became famous. He went back to repairing tractors on his family's farm, just as he had before the war. But to the men who flew the Lightning, his name became legend. Pilots would tell the story for years. The man who fixed the tail of the P-38 with a piece of wire. Barton never sought credit. When asked about it in a 1960 interview, he simply said, "I just wanted to bring my pilot home." And in that simple sentence lies the heart of every war. Not the machines or the medals, but the bond between men who refused to give up.
In July 1942, Japanese forces landed on the northern coast of New Guinea, near the towns of Gona and Buna, in what was then the Australian territory of Papua. After overwhelming the small Australian garrison there, the Japanese army pushed southward, toward the village of Kokoda, on the northern slopes of Owen Stanley Mountains. The Australian defenders put up a stiff fight, but being greatly outnumbered and up against battle-hardened Japanese veterans, Kokoda fell on July 29. The Japanese objective was the city of Port Moresby, on the southern coast of the island, from whose strategically vital airbase they would be within striking distance of much of Australia. The only way to reach Port Moresby overland from the north was via a narrow 60-mile footpath called the Kokoda Track, through the dense jungles that covered the rugged Owen Stanley Mountains. For 7 desperate months, this trail would be the scene of some of the most tenacious fighting of the Pacific Theater. Throughout August, the two armies fought it out in the muddy, malaria-infested jungles. As men fell in combat, much of which occurred at night, thousands more succumbed to disease. Into September, the Japanese pressed on doggedly, while the Australians and their Papuan allies, collectively called the Maroubra Force, conducted a fierce fighting retreat. Both sides suffered severely in what has been characterized as some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. The Japanese had not expected to face such formidable resistance and did not come prepared for such a long campaign, and by mid-September were essentially out of food and supplies. The Maroubra Force likewise was poorly equipped, poorly provisioned, and insufficiently fed. Because the Kokoda track was too narrow and too muddy for vehicles, the Maroubra Force relied on Papuan civilians, who they called Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels, to carry in supplies and carry out the wounded by foot. By September 16, the Japanese were within 35 miles of Port Moresby. But that was as close as they would get.
The Japanese were too far extended. Not only had they come within range of long-range Australian artillery, but their only line of supply was back over the Kokoda track to the north coast, while the Australian defenders could now be reached by trucks. Meanwhile, they had lost over 30,000 troops fighting the Americans on Guadalcanal, and defense of that island became a more urgent Japanese priority than the capture of Port Moresby. So on September 24th, the Japanese began withdrawing back along the Kokoda track, retracing the steps that had cost them so dearly, and with the Australians pursuing and fighting them the whole way. On November 2nd, after weeks of brutal fighting, the Australians retook the village of Kokoda. After another fierce week-long battle, the Japanese withdrew into their fortified positions at their original beachheads. The Kokoda track campaign was over, transitioning into the vicious Battle of Buna-Gona, which would end in January 1943 with the complete expulsion and annihilation of the Japanese force. The Australian diggers who fought on the Kokoda track are remembered and honored for their courage, tenacity, and perseverance. Over 2,200 of them were killed or wounded in the campaign, with thousands more incapacitated by disease. Every Australian soldier captured by the Japanese was executed. Japanese casualties are impossible to calculate, but estimates of their losses from combat and disease range from 5,000 to 10,000. Of course, the Japanese endured the same suffering and hardships faced by the Australians and fought just as tenaciously, but the historical memory of their experiences is marred by the horrifying atrocities and war crimes they committed while on Papua, against both soldiers and civilians.
The longest reach. The interception would stretch the Lightning to its absolute limit. The round-trip distance exceeded 1,000 miles, far beyond the range of any other Allied fighter. Only the P-38, with its twin engines, turbo superchargers, and drop tanks, could possibly make it. Mitchell's squadron modified their aircraft overnight, stripped gun cameras to save weight, added 265-gallon tanks beneath each wing, and plotted a route skimming only 50 feet above the ocean to avoid radar detection. Every detail was measured down to minutes and gallons of fuel. If they missed the rendezvous by even 5 minutes, they would never make it home. At 07:36, 20 P-38s lifted off. They flew low, hugging the sea, the propeller tips slicing spray off the waves. The pilots navigated solely by compass and stopwatch, no radio chatter, no landmarks. The Pacific stretched endlessly ahead, a mirror of sun and water. After 2 hours, Mitchell climbed slightly and began a gentle turn north, his eyes fixed on the clock. 5 minutes early, he muttered. Slow it down. They arrived over Bougainville precisely on schedule, 09:34 a.m. And then, through the haze, they saw them. 2 Betty bombers, glinting silver in the morning light, flanked by a dozen Zeros spiraling above. The ambush. Lieutenant Rex T. Barber and Lieutenant Thomas Lanfear Jr. broke formation and dove from 18,000 feet, throttles wide open.
Their lightning noses shuddered as the air screamed over the wings. Below, Japanese observers shouted warnings. Too late. The Bettys were still in formation when Barber opened fire. His 5 guns tore into the lead bomber's right engine. Flames erupted instantly. Lanfear banked hard and raked the second bomber from wingtip to tail, its fuselage bursting into smoke. The escorting Zeros dove to engage, but the Americans had already completed their run. Barber turned tightly, lining up again on the lead bomber, now descending in a slow spiral. Witnesses later reported seeing a figure in uniform at the window, Yamamoto himself, moments before the aircraft exploded in the jungle canopy near Buin. The hunt was over in less than 3 minutes.
The escape. Now the problem was getting home. Zeros swarmed the sky. Mitchell ordered the squadron to break south. The P-38s dove to wave-top height again, engines roaring, shells and tracers snapping overhead. For hours they skimmed the Pacific, fuel gauges edging toward empty. One by one, lightnings sputtered into silence and ditched near friendly islands. When the survivors finally reached Guadalcanal, the airmen could barely climb from their cockpits. Mitchell radioed a single coded message: "The package is delivered." In Washington, D.C., news of the successful mission was relayed to President Roosevelt. Publicly, the U.S. would release only that Yamamoto had been killed in combat. The code-breaking secret remained classified for decades. The impact. Yamamoto's death was more than symbolic. It shattered Japanese morale and deprived their navy of its most respected strategist. American pilots saw it as payback for Pearl Harbor, justice delivered by skill, courage, and a machine that once doubted by its own engineers. The mission proved the P-38's unmatched range, precision, and survivability. It was the only fighter in the world capable of reaching Bougainville and returning safely. More importantly, it showcased what American intelligence, engineering, and bravery could accomplish when working together. A Japanese staff diary found after the war noted simply, "The gods have left the combined fleet." The legacy of the hunt. The Operation Vengeance mission became legend. Every lightning that took part was etched into aviation history. Mitchell received the Navy Cross. Barber and Lanfear were credited with the kill, though historians still debate whose bullet struck first. But the outcome was undeniable. The war's greatest strategist had been brought down by a fighter that only months earlier some had called unfit for combat. The Pacific would never be the same again. The Lightning had proven itself, not just as a fighter, but as a weapon of precision, range, and retribution. From that day onward, whenever a P-38's twin tails flashed silver against the island sun, every Japanese pilot knew what it meant. The Lightning had come for them.